How many of you are in sales? Okay, I expected a lot of hands. How many of you know one or more people up here on the panel? Please be kind, okay? All right. So the panel today, federal professionals agree that the Internet of Things has intriguing potential for helping government agencies better understand their operations, yet connecting a variety of these sensors and devices come with significant concerns, including information security, platform management, making use of the collected data. And so hopefully this will be, as articulated in the program, a lively discussion about how agencies are implementing IoT applications and how industry, you all, can help agencies select and deploy effective and trusted solutions. My name is Bob Breeze. I'll be the moderator for today. I'm formerly the CIO for the Department of Energy, currently a VP and executive partner with Gartner. You know us primarily for IT research and advisory, but after the acquisition of Corporate Executive Board, or CEB, we do span and advise the entire C-suite. So it's my pleasure to be up here with these gentlemen today. Joining me today from my right, your left, on down, Michael Fagan, that's Dr. Michael Fagan to you, is a computer scientist at NIST, working with the Cybersecurity for IoT program, developing guidelines to improve the cybersecurity of IoT devices and systems at the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. And his doctorate is in computer science and engineering, so technical questions will refer to Michael. Dr. Joe Kirschbaum, Dr. Joe to you, is the Director of Defense Capabilities and Management Team at the Government Accountability Office. So, just so you know where he's coming from, he assists congressional committees by overseeing evaluations of DoD programs involving unconventional threats and capabilities. He's got a 25-year career at GAO. He's conducted and led audits throughout the range of defense and national security programs. And he has a bachelor's degree in history and political science, but a master's degree in national security studies and a PhD in military history from George Washington University. So if he starts talking about, the golden age, with the Germans and World War II and unrestricted submarine warfare, and he's speaking in German, that's okay. Aaron Tregel joins our other panelist and me as not being doctor, but he is a federal consulting systems engineer with HPE Aruba and focusing on emerging networking, technology, security, and government compliance. And the last 24 years supporting missions of the federal government, the last 6 in his current role. And Pete Saronis, who almost cost you this entire panel, the founder and CEO of Dotson Bridges, formerly my chief technology officer when I was a CIO at Department of Energy. So Pete, welcome. He was our first CTO, and now he really couples his passion for collaborating with government and industry. He's an investor. He's working with academic ecosystems. He's the chair for the Global Cities Teams Challenge, focused on demonstrating scalable, replicable, and sustainable models for public, private, and hybrid services. So please welcome our panelists today. Now, there is one set of rules for you all as audience members as I try to weave this conversation for about the next 40 minutes. That is, if you have a question during the course of our discussion, please raise your hand and Jana will hand you a 3x5 card. And please, as legibly as possible, scribble your question on there. She will work those up here. I will try to weave those into the conversation and pick up on any ones that are left over to the best of our ability. But that'll allow us to keep the conversation flowing and for these gentlemen to be able to impart their knowledge and recommendations to you. Sound good? All right. A couple of quick predictions. By 2020, 40% of infrastructure and operations teams will be responsible for their organization's IoT initiatives, up from 5% today. So CIOs are going to become more and more critical to the success of these IoT deployments. On the city side, for state and local government, increasing congestion means cities are installing connected tolling infrastructure, and approximately 95% of urban vehicles will have an in-vehicle toll device at saturation. So not only the glue-on ones, but we're probably going to see those things start to become embedded. My wife's new car actually tells you how much time is left at the stoplight when you're sitting there. She has a lead foot. That is not a good thing to have in your car. It is exactly like that. Just let's hope the person in front of you goes. And one other one, by 2028, connected lighting devices in commercial buildings will grow to 1 per 27 square meters in 2028, up from 1 per 310 meters squared to save money and energy. And there actually is one other one that will probably keep you scared. By 2028, there will be 1 indoor surveillance camera for every 5 employees in the United States. At the same time, there will be 1 per employee in China. All right, so let's get started. Pete, first one's coming to you there, buddy. Predictions vary, but we're looking at likely 5.8 billion connected devices in enterprise and automotive solutions, perhaps as many as 15 to 30 billion devices by 2020, by the end of next year. So let's cover the business and mission value proposition, and what are you seeing as some of the top use cases in the immediate future for government, whether at the federal, state, local, tribal, territorial, et cetera?
Awesome question. Thanks, Bob. Fired up to be up here with my colleagues. And at the risk of probably saying things that you folks already know or statistics you read, the federal government has an initiative that focuses on smart, secure cities and communities. It's run by way of the NIST. It's called the Global City Teams Challenge. It's really the challenge of how are we dealing with these global, ubiquitous, connected devices that we depend on every day, that span the sectors in our country that, as Bob's alluded to, transportation, the power grid, the water systems. Think of acts of God and the impact they've had in our country, and how we've realized as a nation, at least in the States, we weren't prepared, and how now, whether it's a tsunami that has buoys in parts of the oceans in our world that now can predict, oh my gosh, way ahead of time, something bad's gonna happen. I would challenge us all to think about, while the government gets IoT and there's a thing called the industrial Internet of Things, I see, if you think of those sectors as defined by DHS and at the city municipality level, whether it's street lighting, autonomous vehicles, the grid, smart meters in your home, understand that while some people say, I don't want that in my backyard, I don't want my data being stolen, we still want to have control. And that's where you come into the infrastructure discussion around cloud and edge computing and AI and making predictions. So I think it's here, the train left the station. It's how does this convergence of those sectors and all the infrastructure that's very, very old in our country meets we can't wait for that next app to control something in my car. I mean, there's cars now. I was in Chicago recently, and my buddy has one of those new BMW toys, and you don't even touch anything. And anybody seen those? He just does this in front of his radio, and it just starts to change channels. Like you could blink and it changes. It's crazy. The cool stuff has to be powered by secure intelligence, and that's where I think interoperability, Bob, is going to be so important as we innovate in these sectors.
Great. Aaron, did you want to follow up on that, as you're our kind of our provider rep here?
Yeah, part of the, there's a lot of enormous upside value to all of this data that we can bring in for, analytic value. And the genie is out of the bottle. I mean, we're not going to put this back in, like you were saying, Pete, that stop, I don't want that in my backyard. That's not a reality. It's going to be kind of a risk versus reward scenario. But we've also, in government, we've got the unique challenges of procurement, supply chain management, supply chain security. We've got, with our friends here over at NIST, we've got, FIPS validated, crypto, software modules that enable this communication of these sensors to the cloud. So there's, FAR regulations, TAA regulations. So we've got a lot of policy issues that are kind of at a counterpoint to the value of what we want to bring, to the government agencies and let them utilize this data. So it's a very interesting policy versus security versus the utility of these data points. And we're going to have to, over time, we're going to have to navigate this and try to figure out how do we get there, because it's very useful data. It helps the government out, creates significant efficiencies. So there's a lot of upside, but there are cautions that we have to take into account.
So Aaron, I want to continue to pull that thread with you a little bit about some of the integration challenges here. Any recommendations or pitfalls looking at that?
Yeah, the one issue that I see that is somewhat ubiquitous across the government space and state and local is that these sensors, they're going to talk to the cloud. I mean, that's where all the data is going to be aggregated. So within our space, from a compliance angle, you're looking at, okay, cloud equals FedRAMP. So if you're familiar with how you have to deploy public cloud or even gov cloud, it has to be a validated cloud. So that's the FedRAMP process, which is takes into account all of these security and just operational controls that have to be in place. The IoT sensors then have to be integrated into a cloud-based system that will pull in multiple different sensor silos. I mean, if you think about facilities management is a huge, probably, I'm not saying the most promising, but a very promising one for our government facilities, because now you can start pulling in all of the lighting, the fire systems, temperature, humidity, motion detection, cameras, all of these sensors that can detect these different environmental criteria can all be pulled into the cloud. But now you've got to get a provider that has that software or software as a service platform to pull that together, and then a software developer to develop so that they can pull in those feeds from all these kind of disaggregated systems. So that's a bit of a challenge, and it's something that is starting to kind of on an upward curve now, is pulling these pieces together, but there's still a lot of little stovepipe IoT components that are not integrated into a single solution. So I think that is something we're going to see on the uptick over the next couple of years.
Great, thanks. So, with that, Michael, recognizing this IoT system is not going to stand alone, and you're going to see this get integrated into enterprise business systems in order to connect, hey, how do we react to this from a financial and policy perspective? Seems to kind of open up a can of worms. Mm-hmm. From your position over at NIST, how are you helping us address this, and how can organizations kind of minimize this up front today where they've got IoT systems installed, but also as they start to move out?
Sure, yeah. Our group, Cybersecurity for IoT program group at NIST, we're trying to identify some of those gaps in the sense that NIST has a lot of guidance through ITL, Information Technology Lab, and our various divisions on good network practice, good security practice overall, cryptography. I could go on and on, cloud security. And as we've heard, a lot of times IoT introduces new, so the sensors maybe, the scale is one of the big deltas, ability to change our world, be that through the temperature of the room, be that through an oven heating up. That actuation is definitely a change, but strip that away and it's data, it's information, it's connecting to information systems, the same kinds that we're already using right now. And also many times the data is the same. Many phones can generate similar kinds of sensor data that a purpose-built IoT device might be able to generate, just for example. So it becomes a question of making sure that when you're incorporating a new device, say, as an agency, as a government, or a new platform solution, kind of like this cost benefit. Think through the upside to your organization. You could be a business organization as well. We would be able to monitor all of our facilities. We could centralize some of the management. We can respond quicker. Those are all great sells, but where's that data going? Make sure that you're following the same kind of rigor in terms of cybersecurity vetting that you would a laptop or a number of laptops that your agency might be purchasing. Anecdotally, at least, that seems to be part of the issue is IoT devices, because they're just assumed to be either not computers, they're not kind of, just even some folks in agencies or in other organizations or homes are just not aware that they're buying an internet-enabled device, or they're aware but don't understand those implications, or they understand those implications, can't find one that's secured enough, and then just eat that risk. And that's where we're trying to solve some of that. Like, don't eat that risk. If you push harder as a federal agency, ask for certain kinds of capabilities, and at the same time, there's been a response from our perspective from industry, realizing that there are many IoT products out there that aren't going to meet even a home consumer's rigor, let alone the federal government or a state's governments. And so they're interested as well in understanding what are minimum cybersecurity capabilities or features that could be built into devices, assuming very many different kinds of use cases and customers, because that's one of the challenges with IoT. You can assume a laptop has a certain kind of architecture in its hardware. That assumption falls apart for many IoT devices. Many IoT devices are smaller, harder, different form factors. So forcing things like, oh yeah, you just have regular kind of authentication, password management, that kind of thing. Well, what if it has no screen and all the password management is done on another device anyway? Then it's more about the communication, and it's a network level or a communication between devices within your network consideration. And that's the kind of thought, it's not just if you can't do it, that's it. You just can't accept the device. It's just think outside the box when it comes to the kinds of risks you're going to be facing with this device. Understand what those risks are. That's where our guidance is moving toward, or is where it is. And then once you know what you or your customers' risks are going to be, depending on what side of the coin you're at, build devices to meet those. It seems simple when you say it out loud, but it just doesn't seem to happen as much in IoT because maybe there's a lot of focus on the features, the cool new stuff, and security isn't always so cool and new.
Yeah. So once again, if you have questions that come to mind as we go along, please raise your hand. Jana will bring you a card, and we'll try and weave that in. Joe is, or Mike, I'm on 3 questions in my brain right now. I'm going to go to you, Joe, and then I'm going to loop back on a different thought here. But so today, as we see government agencies, and you get a chance, particularly across the DoD, to see how some of this is being installed, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing? We hear about lack of visibility on the network. You talked about some of that challenge. Mm-hmm. Poor vendor support and practices, which we hope you all will be able to, you and your parent companies will be able to help us resolve. Lack of standardization and others. What are you seeing in your audit and oversight type activities?
So for those of you who aren't familiar with what GAO does, right, we look at government programs to ensure they are working the way they are intended. I don't want to surprise anyone in this room, but most of the time we find that they're not necessarily working the way they're intended. Maybe our motto should be harshing your mellow since 1921. But so my lens, as Bob mentioned, is looked at the Department of Defense, and so we looked at, I do a lot of the cyber work at the Department of Defense, and the IoT issue was one of them in particular. So similar to many of the other realms that we look at in DoD, what we find in the cyber area and IoT in particular is a big, fat cultural issue. Yes, it is absolutely true. There's a gargantuan technical component to IoT and cybersecurity and the whole 9 yards, and that's central. But none of that is going to ever get solved until you get some cultural things solved. And so, for example, in the Department of Defense, when we talked with the cyber people, the CIOs of the world, and talked about IoT devices, just in general, the answer is usually they are concerned because of the things you mentioned, how they're built, and so, but we don't allow personal IoT devices on our networks, so that's fine. Everything's fine. And so that's true. They don't, and so you don't get that risk. But then when you go down the hall and talk to the counterintelligence people, and you posit the question, well, is there a concern that you might have hundreds, perhaps thousands of soldiers doing PT, and they're all wearing Fitbits, and that data is being transmitted unencrypted fashion beyond the fence line? And they say, yeah, that might be an issue from the counterintelligence, force protection, security issue. And so, but those people generally aren't talking to each other, or they weren't talking to each other. I shouldn't oversell that. They're doing a lot better now, but those sides, the cyber guys, right, the cyber guys will solve the problem. That's not the way it's going to work. It's not the way it has worked. It's not the way it's going to work going forward. There's got to be a cross-culture. So those people who don't necessarily are involved in those technical side, they've got to be involved in some way, shape, or form. That's how 2 things are going to get done. One, in that traditional DoD doctrinal, how you conduct military operations. That's going to be how they expand those capabilities, how they incorporate IoT, and how they use it going forward. If you understand it and you at least appreciate it, you can use it effectively. You can develop a doctrine in military operations. on the cybersecurity side, understanding where the weaknesses are, and from your perspective, what the challenges are. Where the challenges are is, not to sound cliche, where the challenges are is where the trade space is. So, for example, on, as Mike mentioned, designing devices with security in mind. I mean, it sounds simple, but you know, it's one of the pitfalls of the information age, right? You come up with an idea like IoT, and it's like, oh my God, I can see 1 billion ways to use this. Everybody's off to the races on economy, efficiency, effectiveness, and they all work out great. There's a lot of pitfalls along the way, but they do turn out great. Sometime down the road, sometimes later down the road, sometimes too late down the road, a bunch of people go, wait a minute, all that's being transmitted unencrypted, we have no way to change that. So now you've got to go, it's like the internet, now you've got to go back and, how do you change that whole beast? You can't. So the trade space there is, how do you build that into your thinking? Coming up with 5G, that's going to be critical. It's a trade-off. You're not going to be able to provide the same capability because you've got to build security in. That conversation's got to be had, especially where I'm thinking of the Department of Defense. You may get some willing partners in that, but that's where the trade space has got to be.
Okay, thanks. So, Pete, I don't want to throw you for a loop, but I like this cultural thing. And based on the breadth of your contacts across the whole spectrum of federal all the way down to territorial and tribal, even down to the city level, what kind of cultural issues are you seeing broadly?
Yeah, I want to thank you. That's a great question and segue.
But you're going to answer a different question.
No, I'm going to answer that. I'm going to answer that. But I'm going to go back to Bob's question about how many folks in here sell to the government, federal government. Okay. How many to the state, local only? Okay, that's where the cool stuff is happening in the real mission. So whether it's a interoperability, a standard, if you're selling to the government, and you're selling to one of those 452, yes, agencies per the Federal Register that exist, not just 30, know the mission of the agency and where IoT serves that mission. So where I see it, Bob, when I go to places like Pittsburgh or Austin or Silicon Valley, and I see people who are like, we need a smart city in New Orleans, for example, post-Katrina. They had an opportunity, unfortunately, through a disaster that killed people, to say, this is how non-resilient our city is. How are we going to leverage technology to save lives? The DoD says mission is to save lives. The DoD is using IoT when our folks are in theater. So think of the mission of the agency, and the stories, the facts tell, but the stories sell in cities and communities. You take those stories, you bring them to your federal agency and go, you know, at the EPA, you seem to care about air and water. Here's a use case per Flint, Michigan, where we were able to, hopefully in the future, detect corrosion in pipes that will not kill people anymore. That's pretty compelling versus IoT, cool standards, yeah, we could use that at the department because it can track our laptops. I don't find that to be very compelling, which is why how do you secure it? How do you create a city more resilient? What standard should we use? I think we could all agree if we wait for policies, it's not going to happen. Train left the station. New policy on IPv6 that you're rumbling and hearing about, which could maybe make things a little more understandable in an era where it's been 10 years since that policy came out, and now it's how do these devices talk to each other? We all embrace AI. Machine learning's key to that. How are we making sense of the data that is just in mass? And this is where, if you have a cloud story, talk about how the cloud provider that you leverage, FedRAMP or not, to distill information to make better decisions so cars are safer, and maybe Bob's wife doesn't, when she hits that accelerator, it doesn't take off right away because it knows the car in front of them is still texting or something like that.
It does brake automatically.
The net is culturally, organizations, cities. Think of a city and a municipality. And Bob, there's some cities in this country on the West Coast and the East Coast that we're so advanced, we have all the cool stuff. Big part of our country still doesn't have internet access. And to get these technologies in the hands or in the opportunistic regions so that folks can travel safer, or like I used to think, or I like to hear is, folks say when you get to be, old, you don't get to see the world anymore. You're kind of confined. An autonomous vehicle for folks in their golden ages is pretty damn cool. I'll take one because I can't stand driving 22 miles from Gaithersburg into DC every day when I need to, and it takes me 2 hours. So I think it's a bit of the chicken and egg, but I find that if we go to the places that are using the technologies or have the reason and the need for it, it's important for industry to say, help me understand that need. Something bad may have happened. There's clearly a NIST documentation that's going to reference interoperability issues when deploying a secure IoT network. I've read these documents. There's best practices the GAO will put out. So you're selling, go with a story, not just this cool device that'll make their life easier.
Yeah, I love the fact that you bring up stories. I mean, humans have grown up. You know, we have more oral narrative than we do written narrative in the way that we share stories, and that's really how you can really capture the interest of the people around you. I really appreciate you raising that approach. Michael, some of the standards piece, you know, we have a lot of approaches today to, you know, from our standard small electrical appliances, large electrical appliances with UL certified and other certifications. What's the future of an IoT certification that lets us know this thing is reasonably constructed and secure? May not be, you know, a complete attestation that it's perfectly secure. What's the future in something like that?
Yeah, so our group works, so obviously NIST, you know, we provide some of the foundational work. We don't do any of the certifications ourselves, but we're aware of a number of certification efforts in the United States and globally already in the field of IoT. A lot of them are looking at, you know, sometimes it's attestation because secure by design is a big topic, as we've already kind of mentioned. So you can't test secure by design always. You know, how do you prove a device sitting in your lab isn't able to do X if X is outside of its use? That's tough, so it's maybe more of attestation. Yes, we as a business or manufacturer follow these standards for secure by design as those are coming out as well. So there will always be some component of attestation, but I have seen a movement towards validation of some of these claims. Various software tools are out there nowadays, even some public source or open source stuff that can dig into IoT devices in particular and understand where there could be vulnerabilities, drawing on things like CVEs, common vulnerabilities, but also getting smart. AI is piping into this, you know, learning what is bad to do in source code in ways that, you know, you'd have to really dig into it to find, but it's quick when it gets flagged. Hey, this is something we don't usually see. Oh yeah, you shouldn't be just embedding your personal email address in the comments, for example. So, you know, more and more there's this wanting from some sectors to open up the black boxes, so to speak. A lot of IoT right now is just you get your device, it has its interfaces, you could rip it open, you could try to figure it out with a lot of engineering. That's getting a lot easier, where you can just plug some stuff in, get a lot of information about what that device does. And I've heard and seen those certification programs moving towards that kind of stuff and developing in-house or using existing solutions to exactly that. When a device comes in, it will be plugged in and they can test it. One of the ongoing issues with certification that is definitely on the tip of people's tongues is when you certify a device, point in time, update comes out, now what? Every device, when it's getting certified, will most likely be certified before it goes to market. By the time it goes to market, an update will be available. So even the certification that got assigned earlier could be stale by the time it hits market, and that's something folks are grappling with in different portions. You know, more automated tools to make recertification easier. You know, when an update comes, we can test the software and see that there weren't bugs introduced. That helps. But it's an area where I see some movement, and there could be more to come as to how certification can grapple with the dynamicness of software and IoT.
Yeah, and certification is certainly, you know, one, I don't want to say minor, but one piece of a multi-pronged approach to the fact that the supply chain really is a critical component here of the risk management approach. And so Aaron, as a provider thinking about that, you know, recently, you all may be familiar with Aventura. It was a video surveillance, video monitoring, data recording company. Effectively went out of business overnight due to the fact that after a federal sting operation, they finally made public the fact that the company was intentionally covering up that all of their stuff was made in China and then stamped as made in America and sold as American goods. Aaron, you're our provider.
So
How about that?
Yeah, that was particularly disturbing. I mean, just on the level of,
That was intent. That was
the
not,
level of intent
yeah.
and intense deceit was very alarming. But secure supply chain management is not something that I have found historically that the government, a lot of folks, especially in the who are using the technology, think about. Procurement, looks into it. Obviously, that's where TAA compliance comes in, or BAA if it's actually made in the United States. But the components of these sensors are generally made, probably, I would say at least 80% are made overseas. Most of the subcomponents are made somewhere in the Asia-Pac region. And this, creates a difficult kind of conundrum for the government, state and local, is that, 23 of the 32 components or subcomponents that are in this sensor come from a country that is, non-TAA compliant. And while there are ways to develop other pieces and software to, affect that, 51% transformation of a product in a trade agreement compliant country, so you've, hit that 51%, so now it's TAA, but, what's in those components, the 20 plus subcomponents that came from, country or factory A, B, C, D, E. And I really don't have a good answer, regarding that type of supply chain management for for these small, inexpensive, mass-produced devices. When you get into, larger components, more expensive components, or a conglomeration of those into a product, that's a lot easier to control. You can, make sure that you get those resources and those chips and things in places that have been deemed secure, safe, and a really good traceability matrix for the origin of those parts. But we're talking about inexpensive little sensors. Now, whether you're talking consumer level, stuff that's built into your mobile devices or your tablets, Fitbits, I'll say Apple Watch, but you get the idea. It is going to be very, very challenging to have what the government considers a secure supply chain for those subcomponents within those devices. So that is going to be an ongoing issue. And I think with that regard, you're going to have to really focus on, the government's going to have to push to ensure that there's TAA compliance for the sensors that you want to deploy. And being realistic and kind of practical, that is going to limit your focus of your selection. Now, state and local governments are going to have more latitude with regard to this. Civilian government will have more latitude. DoD, of course, will have less as you kind of go up the sensitivity scale. But you're going to have to ask for something, and as the government being the customer, they're going to have to, I don't want to say demand, but really encourage industry to have the secure supply chain, make sure that things are coming from the most reputable countries that they can, make sure that that is validated, secure by design. Please.
No, I want to riff, because think about when you're selling, the capability that you want to get to, your PowerPoint deck that you want to get to, and the uniqueness of your product that you want to get to, as long as you don't slam your competition. That's all fine and nice, but think about leading with not how many logos and where you are, but how you did your research on, listen, I know you're probably thinking, or maybe not, about supply chain risk issues, and the reason that we are here today is because we've at least checked these boxes. And you'll get them at hello. Because that question's going to come, and it's going to kill all the cool stuff that you want to get to.
Right.
It's like FedRAMP compliance, right? We all know it's important. It's a deal killer sometimes because you can't explain yourself out of it. But what I'm hearing you say is, it matters, and most importantly, get past that and show that your customer is going to know that you put the homework in to distinguish not your value proposition, but that you did your homework. Mm-hmm. That's huge.
Yeah, and again, if you have questions, raise your hand. Jana will get you a card. But Joe, I want to come to you because there's some legal direction to the Department of Defense, and they've got probably one of the stronger, if not the strongest, supply chain risk management program around. What are you seeing there, and are there some best practices you've seen that might be useful for others?
Yeah, the supply chain issue with the Department of Defense is critical. You know, the whole idea of just chips in general, where to get them, how to get them, how to encourage a reasonably stable supplier base of people that are interested in supplying to a relatively small market, the Department of Defense. That's been problematic for years. So you extend beyond that, some of the general cyber security extensions they're trying to do now, like for the cybersecurity maturity model and things of that nature, that everyone's trying to grapple with. Well, how do we implement this? That's a way forward. And once again, it's like a cultural thing. How to get everybody involved in that? But then you still got to apply it to some of the things that people think of not necessarily as cyber, but beyond the IoT stuff. How do you bring that in that environment? Those are still holes that need to be filled. And even someplace like Department of Defense, who's kind of on that bleeding edge, is still trying to fill that hole.
Yeah, great, thanks. I think one of the recurring themes across the entire technology industry is a blend of lack of talent, mainly a shortage of talent. I don't mean that as that we don't have talented people, but there is an imbalance in the demand and supply and demand equation here. So any recommendations, Aaron, I'll look to you first, but on growing talent internally, recruiting it. I know poaching is still an option. I did it frequently in my roles, but any thoughts on the talent pipeline here?
Yeah, with one thing that I have seen over a number of years, and again, this is just my opinion, but interacting with my government customers is when I started my career, there was a really big investment in the employee, and that was around training, certifications, whatever field they were in. There was a large government investment in getting those people who wanted the opportunity and were wanted to put in that work to get education, career path, training, certifications, classes, and that was sort of when I saw a lot of really good talent, and there was a lot of, it felt like there was a lot of reasons that the people were like, hey, I'm getting invested in here. They're really interested in my growth. And over the years, I've seen most of my customers like, I can't get training anymore. The investment's not there. Again, this is just my opinion, and it's going to vary by agency. But to retain talent or to grow talent internally, the government has to invest in their own people, and they have to send them to these industry classes, courses outside of maybe possibly their normal day job, if you will, to let them grow, expand, broaden their horizon in their field, or maybe into an adjacent field. That to me is something that I have seen in the past really solid 5 to 8 years just doesn't seem to happen anymore. And I think it's a real flaw in the system, because if you don't invest in your people, you're not going to keep people, you're not going to grow, organically grow your talent base, and you're also not going to attract people if the word gets on the street that you're not willing to invest in people. And I don't want that to come off as so negative, but it's just something that I have seen very predominant in the last several years. So I think that the government is going to have to find a way, even in these lean times, to turn that personnel investment around. And of course, there's obviously outside recruiting, but if you've got to turn it around internally first, I think, before you're going to be able to pull talent in from the inside. So again, for what it's worth.
Yeah, and I think that's an opportunity for you all in your roles to make sure that the talent that exists in your companies is really showcased, and how you can augment the talent pools that exist in government, whether it's with the actual government, military or civilian population, but also the contractors and support teams that are in those organizations each and every day. Once again, if you got a question, raise your hand. Jan will get you a card, but In the meantime, what I want to do is give each of you about 60 seconds. I won't put you on the clock, but I will cut you off. Is there anything in particular that you would like to say to this group to help them be more successful as they leave here today? And I'm going to start with you, Pete.
Sure. Mine is don't sell the impossible or the unbelievable. This is all about risk mitigation from maybe a policy that's interpreted away by some general counsel or some company legal person that says, we should be good with this in terms of selling our products. You're here to mitigate risk. You're here to sell products to the largest purchaser of IT in the world, the federal government, and we buy stuff. We've bought a lot of stuff over the years, and a lot of it's to keep the lights on. When you get into the space of opportunity and pushing the envelope and being innovative, focus on risk mitigation versus I don't want to oversell and hook, line, and sinker and make my number that quarter. And I think you're going to establish some credibility because the stuff's work and tech is never the problem.
Thanks, Pete. Michael?
Yeah, playing off of that, I think sort of the inverse. If you've got a risk that you haven't mitigated, inform the customer of that. Don't hide that fact away. To the point, there's technologies to fix those, to mitigate that to the agencies or whoever your customers might be, standards, controls, however they're interpreting that. So that's been our team's big position lately. A lot of the guidance we're pushing is about communicating with customers. It's that culture, how you on some level also start stoking the culture is whoever you're talking to in an organization, mentioning the cybersecurity aspects of your device, along with the cool things it does, will then remind them, if they aren't aware, that they should be paying attention to that. And if they're not aware, it might bring that to their attention in a way that maybe their agency isn't, because roles have become so dispersed and folks wear too many hats in many cases. So, I think that's the biggest takeaway. The agencies are becoming more and more aware of these challenges, and the more you can do to help them realize your solution or your tool or your product is going to meet those challenges or help them meet or get over those challenges, mitigate those challenges, that's where you're going to probably make yourself look much better than a lot of the competition that we see these days, at least.
Great. Thanks. Joe?
So I'm not going to talk about unrestricted submarine warfare, but I will remind you, picking up that kind of risk management theme, that in military history, it is actually, despite what you read, is not the shiny, brand spanking new military weapon that makes the difference. It is how it is used and incorporated into the existing doctrine and structure. So picking up on what I was talking about before, where you have this gulf between what the technical side of the house and where everyone else is supposed to be, whether it's using devices, having sensors on their person, understanding what the risks are, anything you can do to help the Department of Defense and anybody else bridge that gulf, whether it's a technical solution or applying an existing solution to another set of problems, will be of benefit to them, helping them, whether it's understanding baseline data, building that base, for insider threat purposes, or whether it's a solution that helps the people that don't understand these devices better correlate information. Those are the kind of things that are going to be of tremendous help, and that's where all you can fit in easily.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Aaron?
I would say if you're a vendor, supplier, or a integrator, turn some of this around back inwardly in your organization to push these federal requirements, these compliance, these secure by design. Make sure that when you're interfacing with your headquarters or engineering teams, that they know who they're building this for. Yes, maybe you're building it for tons of different verticals, but the federal vertical, if you're going to sell there are requirements that come along with that, and it is way easier to design something out of the ingredients and bake it in than to take this, metaphorically, this cake out of the oven and tear it apart and have to retrofit it to meet the market. So secure by design, push these initiatives internally within your companies to get them to build things right the first way. And then from addressing with your customers the cultural aspect of the fear of IoT, use those use cases that they were pointing out that will help the customer to push them to really push the envelope of the IoT acceptance. Now, this is going to take a while, but it's almost like a crowdsourcing effort. If enough of the government, customers start embracing this slowly, it will create a swell, and somewhere in between, the technology and the swell and the demand will meet, and we'll end up with something that is good and worthwhile.
Great, thanks. So I have 3 bullets that I'm going to say here to wrap up. One is immediately following this, the 5 of us are required to go stand over by that and do a selfie. If you want a selfie with one of these or more than one of these gentlemen, please jump in immediately following our group selfie.
Photo bomb.
The other is that if you have questions, I think they'll be around for at least a few minutes if you want to catch up with them. But with that, please join me in thanking them for this session.